Do you want to start with that, actually? That could be interesting.
I don't want to start with that.
Okay, great. Perfect. Emily, before we started rolling, you said something very interesting on camera or off camera about the connection between Unitarians and Calvinists.
You just want me to say it for TikTok.
And something that you said, I roasted you for. But
you
say
did.
It again. What did you
roast me
say?
For
it, and let's talk more about it.
So you said an interesting fact is that out of the Reformed Church came the Unitarian Universalist Church.
Yeah, in the family tree, they're on the same branches.
In the family tree. And I fully believe that because I believe to my core that you can't be a Universalist without being a little bit Calvinist or without thinking that in some way God is overriding your free will, which isn't an issue for me because I don't really care about my free will. But I remember I looked at my friend one time and she was like, I'm a Universalist, but I think there's free will. And I was like, you can't. I was like, you have to choose. I was like, unless you think that everyone on their own will choose heaven. And I was like, but to me that's the irresistible grace. Like that's the irresistibility. And I was like, in a sense, that is kind of like an overriding of your will a little bit. And she was like, and so I was like, you have to choose. You can either have your free will or you can be a Universalist. And she was like, damn. And I just really believe that. And I don't care if you think that I'm an idiot. I believe that because I think that like God gets what God wants and God desires all to be saved. And if those things are true, then like, to me, that's the most loving is to override our free will. Although my therapist said something really interesting about free will the other day.
Yeah.
Can I get into it?
Yeah. He
said this, and I was like, damn, Gary, that is pretty interesting because I was like, F free will, I don't care. We talk about weird things in therapy. And he goes, but free will is like, giving free will is like the giving of love. And I was like, shut up. He was like, I didn't say that. But he talked about like a previous relationship that I had. And he was like, you never like forced him to do anything that like he wasn't comfortable with. I don't mean that how it probably kind of came off, but like, like you said what you needed and you said what you wanted. And then like you ultimately let him choose whether he did it or not. And he was like, that was you not only like giving him the freedom, but also you opening yourself up to receive the love instead of like demand it.
In the immortal words of Cat Stevens, if you want to be free, be free.
And I get that, but I kind of think that's a false dichotomy.
Yeah. Well, a couple things. One, I don't think you're stupid. I do not agree fully with what you're saying, but I do actually agree with the idea that a Unitarian is at a core, at least in the predestination thing, could be pretty Calvinist, though I don't think overriding our free will is the most loving. And B, I do think that God will get what God wants. Okay. I said that in service on Sunday. But I do think that it can be so, this is where we've disagreed before. I think it'd be so compelling that it can win us over. And that is not in the same breath God forcing us to make that decision.
I'm fine with that. I am fine with that. I just think that, but let's say it's not compelling to someone. I think it is way less loving of God to be like, you didn't want it. You can have fun in hell.
Yeah, I hear you on that side.
Do you know what I'm saying about that?
Yeah, you spend more time thinking about the person that may not like it, where I think about how wonderful it is for all the people that will and how eventually everyone will. Especially if time is
The Great Divorce, which you haven't read.
I have not read. But if time is a human construct, then who cares how long it takes for someone to be won over? Because that's only something we experience. Like God is moving outside of our understanding of time and space anyway.
So, yes, and there's also a theory that everyone goes to one place, but it's not heaven for everyone right away.
Purgatory is like being on an airplane that's waiting to take off.
Yeah.
Like if you're a bigot or like a jerk, I don't know, and everyone is like enjoying community with a bunch of people different than them, like that might not feel heavenly until like your heart is shaped. Yeah. And you know what? I messed around with that idea.
Yeah, I think I've used that analogy before too, actually.
So actually, I do want to start with our email quarter.
Oh, look at you. You were so opposed to it before we started.
I was like, absolutely not, because I know how to set boundaries. But
and you also know how to remove them because you're going to read it now.
Yeah, and that's and you know what? This is still my free will. A year ago, though, on this podcast, I would have been like, yeah,
Of course we'll do emo corner.
whatever you want.
Which makes it sound so negative. This is more a you thing than it was a me thing.
Yeah, it was. I felt like you were constantly like, hey, man, like, it's okay.
Yes.
Anyway,
Let's hear this email.
This email. So it's just like, I'll read it, I guess. I'm not going to read it. It's just, so I can speak for this person fully. I'm kidding. They just wrote, I said, like, what do you want us to talk about? And they just wrote the grief of no longer believing in an afterlife, heaven or hell. And I thought that was really interesting because I do believe in an afterlife, but also, and you mentioned this in the last episode very briefly, so I want you to touch on this. But you said often that, like, Jesus talks way more about life here. Like, he says, like, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Like, he's consistently bringing us back to earth. And so to me, the antidote for grief of the future is to, like, if you're no longer believing in that, is to sit with the impermanence of this earth.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a question.
Yeah. So the question at hand is, how do you handle the grief of not believing in an afterlife anymore?
Yeah, which is interesting.
I would start by saying, and this is an overgeneralization, so whoever sent this might fully and wholeheartedly disagree with me, but I think that the grief is throwing out the wonderful idea of shalom in heaven that they felt like they had to throw out because they don't agree with hell.
All right.
And so sometimes I think we throw both and out because we don't like what we've been fed about the other side of the coin. Where I also said in service, and we did a thing on heaven and hell, I was like, I do believe in a literal hell, but I also would say I don't believe that ultimately anyone will spend eternity there. But I can still believe in something that exists and believe that God's grace is so irresistible that people would not end up there. But so for me, like, I think people are grieving that. They're like, oh, I have to throw them both out because this thing is so terrible and antiquated or not biblical or whatever reason that they feel like they have to throw it out. And then what they're grieving is like, well, but I had to throw heaven out because all afterlife is bundled up together. And I would say there could be more work to be done. And this is where I think we're kind of an all or nothing culture. It's like, I have to throw them both out. And so then I would grieve that too. If like life would, and I do think Jesus spent 70% or more of his time talking about here and now because the kingdom of heaven was here. And I think that like he believed in this Hebrew idea of shalom and that like completeness and wholeness and that like heaven, we weren't evacuating. Like there was a new heaven and new earth, but like there was a restoration of the current heaven and current earth, or the current earth that we were in. And like Jesus wasn't like, well, let's get out of here. So like litter all you want and murder as many people and destroy the earth. Like I think Jesus was way more ecologically minded, way more human minded. Like he cared about here and now because it wasn't something just like our lives to be thrown away so we could get the better, more full one later. Like there could be an experience of that shalom and completeness here and now. Okay.
From
my understanding, I said that as if that was like ultimately true. That's how I understand that to be true.
I think that makes a ton of sense. So you're saying that like she's really more grieving the hope of restoration.
Yeah.
So I thought of it more as this like letting go of the idea of eternity. And I think that it's not really devil's advocate, just a different side of a prism. But I don't know. Like the idea, I think sometimes people use the afterlife, though, even heaven, in an attempt to avoid current hard feelings. And so I think like something about maybe let's say you don't believe in heaven anymore. You have to like really sit with death.
Yeah.
In a way that like someone who believes in heaven doesn't really have to sit with it. And so in that sense, like that is a lot harder.
Yeah. I think it's hard. Like I was actually having like I was watching a document or a movie and like one of the kids like died in the movie. And I just thought about like how terribly sad that would be if like one of my kids died. Right. Like it just ripped my heart out. And like, I was kind of under the impression that I would never be like hyper emotional dad. And I turned into like just a wet ball of tears. It was terrible. But like me believing wholeheartedly in like an afterlife doesn't make like the impermanence of life here less painful. Right. And so it's like, that's really painful.
For sure.
But I think it would be more painful if I didn't think that there was anything after that. And so I can get around that idea of like, if this is the last time I'd ever see like someone that really mattered to me, that would be really like a bummer.
Right.
I also, my wife and I talk about this sometimes. I also don't think that we have spouses in heaven. And
Jesus says that very blatantly.
Yeah. So
Is it that obvious?
and I know
I'm
it's not like
sorry.
that hot of a take, but I think it's something that we don't think about very often. And the idea and maybe I don't know that we do or don't or whatever, but I was like, you can't love me more than any. So this is the reasoning I said behind this.
72.
I said this to my wife, and this would presume there is also a hell. But I said there could be nothing good about spending eternity in heaven if your partner might also go to hell. So then you can't have a spouse in heaven because of the chance that they might not make it there. Was what like the thought I had on that. Does that make sense?
Very interesting.
But again, like I think everyone's gonna be there, so it's kind of a moot argument for me. But I do think it's interesting. Like if you were like, I believe in a literal hell, and most people are going there, like why you would ever get married. Because you might not have your kids, or like you would lose half of your family.
Well, what those people would have said is like is that you're so enthralled with Jesus that like that was just an image of Christ in the church, which now you're like living the real thing.
Yeah, and you're just like, let those suckers burn.
Yeah, you're just so fixed on Christ as you've been this whole time.
Can we, I know that, I don't think you believe that, right? So, but can we talk about how like, and I believe like Jesus is that compelling. I think that would be so wonderful. But that would be such a not wonderful, that'd be such a terrible thing, like to think about. Like, I guess we don't have to go down this.
To be focused on Christ?
No, like if let's say my Annie and all of my kids were in hell.
Right.
Or I was in
I don't know why I laughed at that.
like, I'm like, yeah, Jesus is so dope. Which Jesus is that dope. But like, that would be such a bummer.
Yeah.
I don't know, we don't have to walk down this, but
It would be a bummer.
yeah. Annie, we'll spend eternity in heaven together.
Annie, please don't go down a dark path and go to hell. I know it's seeming like you're about to. I'm kidding. That was a joke.
For someone that's never been on the pod,
Poor Annie.
power rankings of top mentioned on the pod.
Annie's like, let's start a different podcast about my own journey because I'm tired of you guys talking about me.
I think Annie and we were going to start a podcast. I told
About
you.
marriage?
Yeah, I think. Well, I don't know. That's exactly going to be, but
I think that'd be super fun. I'd listen to it.
we want to try something.
I was gonna say something else. Oh, I will say though, I actually think that the grief of heaven is the existentialist dilemma. Are you
Say
ready?
more. Yeah, I'm
You're so ready.
because I don't exactly know what just came out of your mouth.
And so the idea of existentialism is that like in this life, there's no God, there's no afterlife. In this life, you're not born with an essence, you create the meaning. But this is what Albert Camus, who's like, he created the idea of Sisyphus.
STDs are having a field day.
The thing that like you're constantly
you.
just pushing up. Did you say God bless you?
Did you sneeze?
Stop. The deal where the guy's constantly pushing a rock up a mountain.
Oh, yeah. Is that what that's called? I've never heard that.
The myth of Sisyphus that's the guy's name.
Okay, I didn't know it.
And so like his victory is the fact that he knows that it's meaningless and therefore has found meaning is his whole idea. But this is what Camus said. This is one of my favorite quotes. He says, "Beauty is unbearable, drives us to despair, offering us for a moment that which we wish would go on into eternity." And I think about that quote all the time because I think there's something in us innately that just like aches for eternity and aches for the good things to last forever. So I think the fact of the matter is if you don't believe in afterlife, beauty is, what did I just say? Say the quote back to me. No, I'm kidding.
No, there's so many words. You're throwing so many things at me right now that it's hard for me to catch them
I
all.
get that, but beauty drives us to despair. And I think if you don't believe in an afterlife, beauty will always drive you to despair. And that's that on that. What a hopeful comment.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Because you, more than anyone I know, and I really do think this is true, have like scripture locked and loaded.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of quotes. And you said, like, I think about this all the time.
I do.
How much is it just like you have these things rolling around? Like you're in this interaction, you're like, damn, I got this quote that fits this.
All the time.
All the time.
All the time. Well, so I actually started this practice called a commonplace book, which is a very ancient practice that I kind of rebooted.
Yeah.
And I have this little notebook and I write quotes that like stand out to me and mean something to me. And then, so it's really cool because you can look back. So the aim of the practice is to look back and see like what you were valuing if you like look at all the quotes combined.
Yeah.
Which is super dope. But also like writing it does kind of stick it in your brain.
Yeah.
And so like me doing the process of like writing it in this notebook, like it does stick with me.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that.
Okay, so you have the topic idea today.
Yeah, I do.
I don't know if you really answered this person's question.
Well, I think in some ways, I mean, I think it's complex, right?
I think we validated it.
It's hard when you think about life beyond, like to grieve what you don't believe exists anymore.
Yeah.
And then the impermanence of the lived life you have. And then throwing out all of the structures that you had. Now, I would say on the other side, like I said, I think you don't have to throw like the good out with the bad, right?
Yeah.
Like, but yeah. But with that in mind, so yeah, I did have a talk.
I actually have a story that I was telling my friends that they said is really powerful. So I don't think I've told this on the pod. Have I talked about my Getting Love Wins, the book when I was 12?
That you like ripped up?
Yeah, I cut it up.
Yeah.
But that I had asked for Love Does by Bob Goff.
Oh, no.
And got Love Wins.
Yeah.
My friends were like, that was God like giving you. And I was like, that's kind of beautiful.
That
anyway.
is interesting. So the what I wanted to talk about was because we're now like everything now in my mind, it's like we're in our second year of existence. And so I'm looking back retrospectively at our digital book of quotes, the places we've gone and the things we've said. And I was just talking to a couple that we just stayed with a little bit about your journey actually. And how like you can kind of break it into thirds. It's like your team, your faith as you knew it, but still navigating deconstruction, right? And then you kind of threw everything out and like, or if you're using the analogy of like you took everything out of the room, you still held on to a few things. Then you're like, everything's out of the room. And I'm actually probably going to rent a different apartment for a while.
Yeah.
And now you're maybe back in your old place and you're moving some things and not everything, right? Or maybe you bought a whole new place and you're making it look like what you need it to look like. Whatever.
That feels a little bit truer, honestly.
Yeah.
And I did just like move into a different apartment and that feels very much like I kind of fresh started it.
Oh my gosh. Sorry. Can we talk about how my wife messaged you to be a part of your close friends on Instagram?
Honestly, I felt terrible about that.
Oh my. So let me catch everyone up.
She absolutely deserves to be on my close friends, and it was a true oversight on my part.
But it's like asking someone to be your bridesmaid.
No, but also like for you to be on my close friends and not her, like that would hurt my feelings. I'm 100% on her side.
I think she should be. I was appalled
and now she is.
When she sent you that message. I was like, I would never ask someone to do that.
No, I was like, oh my God, I thought you were. And so I felt super bad because that would I would be like, what the heck, Emily? And she was like, Danny, it thinks I'm being stupid. And she was like, but now I feel like we had a moment. And I was like, I think so too.
Annie, I love you.
Annie, it was truly an oversight. I think you're wonderful and you are one of my close friends.
It's actually one of the reasons I've never done close friends on Instagram.
Yeah, because you think it'll hurt people's feelings.
Yeah, but I guess you don't know if you're not a part of it.
Unless someone's husband says, look at this.
I did show her because I just assumed that she was a part of it.
Right.
But
I also assumed. I'm very sorry, Annie.
Yeah, this is really funny.
I'm offended right now.
Dustin's not on my close friends.
We're realizing maybe a lot of people aren't.
Okay, it's a very elite list.
I don't want to be on it anymore.
Right. It's not that exciting. It's just like I really just post mean things my sister says that are really funny.
Pretty funny. Okay. So, but this has been a long journey, like up and down, lots of different things. Sorry, that was such a hard shift.
It's so funny.
It's been a big journey, and I feel like you've had a lot of different like movements relationally, and you've had people that have really rallied around you.
Yeah.
You've probably had people that have walked away from you. You've had people that have really been curious about it, and people that are like, this is just of the devil, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like and disappointed, maybe some people that are proud of you. And I just want to know, like, and this is pretty broad, so I'll let you guide it however makes the most sense, but like just what this has been like and where you've drawn support from, and maybe what has been the biggest, I don't want to say letdown, but biggest like kick in the gut, like as you've gone through this and being like, man, like I really thought this person would be there, or I really thought this wouldn't change, or this wasn't that big of a deal for whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think the people that have been supportive have pretty much been supportive the whole time. Like, you're kind of, the people that are still supportive of me now are the people that, like, when I was in like my atheist phase was like, were just like, you know, like, we love you and we support this journey. Even if they didn't fully agree with me, like, they were like, we think this is where you need to be right now. And even like, I have another friend who I feel like is currently in like that atheism season that I was in. And I've just been like, freaking go through this phase. Like, you have to be here right now.
Yeah.
And it's even when I was in that phase, for someone to be like, that's where you need to be right now, but not forever. I was like, shut up. This is the new me, you know? And so I struggle with saying like, this is a great season for now. So, but I just like, people need to go through that season.
Yeah.
All I'm trying to say is there have been friends who have like truly stuck by me through it all. And I've just been like very thankful for that.
Mm-hmm.
However, like, I mean, this podcast has like, I feel like done a lot of damage like in my life. That's very dramatic.
Well, I actually wanted to dive into the role of the podcast. So
Yeah,
like, continue down what you're saying. Like,
so deconstruction in general.
no, sorry, continue what you're going to say, whatever about the podcast and how it's.
I want to dive into like what the podcast has like been to my life.
Okay, yeah.
I'm gonna start with the good. It has been so freaking cool to like see people truly like come out of the woodworks who like I hadn't spoken to in years, who have like, I was texting this girl from high school and she was like, it was so funny because we were texting and she was like, I honestly feel like so starstruck talking to you. And I was like, dude, we literally like were bros in high school. Like, but I get when someone's like a podcast host, like,
Yeah.
the vibe feels different.
Yeah.
But she was just like, I'm so thankful. Like, I feel less alone. And like, a lot of people have said that. A lot of people who knew me when I was like hyper fundamentalist, like very rigid. And so I think it's probably just been cool for people to watch my journey, especially who knew me. But also like, it's just been very cool and very powerful for people to message me and be like, this has meant a lot to me. And I feel so much less alone because I know when I started the process, like, I felt so alone. And I've said from the beginning, like, if this podcast makes one person feel less alone, like, it will be worth it for me because the loneliness is so real. And one of my old, like, kind of youth group leader people messaged me and was like, girl, I'm like 100% deconstructed and like this podcast is so helpful.
Oh, dang. Like from like that was the adult leader of your youth group, like when you were in youth group.
Yeah, like a specific youth group I was in for a little bit. Like it's
okay,
not,
cool. That's a big deal, kind of.
It was huge. And she was like, you probably don't remember me. I was like, no, of course I remember you. And this is not what I thought you would say about the podcast.
Yeah.
But like, that's been so powerful. Like, and honestly, like that woman messages me like a lot after almost like every episode. Like she'll just be like, love this part of it. Like very cool, very powerful.
I don't want to interrupt you, but isn't that one of the most interesting, like fun parts for you? Like,
yeah,
I'm always surprised by the people that have been engaged. Like when people like, I listen to it, I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like it's so surprising to me. But then when they're like, I drew value from this, I'm like, that's like such a cool thing. And it often is with the people we probably least expected.
Mm-hmm. And even like my grandma or like my Nana, she will say like, she's like, I thought that I was like an old woman and kind of like didn't have any more deconstructing to do. And even just like, she was like, even if it's not the same things, like the process you're modeling is something people constantly go through about a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really powerful. Like this can be applied to like bigger things.
Sure.
And I think also, we talked about this more at the beginning, but I have been surprised by the fact that people have resonated with my story because I thought that I came from like a more obscure like sect of Christianity. And so I was like, people probably aren't going to relate to like the reformed vibe of it, but people really have. And I think there hasn't been a lot of representation of that in the deconstruction media space. And so like that has been cool. And it has been cool specifically for people who like grew up with me because they're like, we for sure relate. We grew up with you. Like we went through the same things.
Yeah.
And that like, that truly never gets old. Like when people message me, even when like people I don't know, like find me and message me, like it just always just means so much to me.
Yeah, it's a reminder too of like how small St. Louis is, and then you shrink that to the nugget of like you were a part of, right? It's like it's a smaller community, but it's also like a bigger community than I think you probably understood. Like it's I think more mainstream of a faith tradition than I think you probably gave it credit for.
But I do also think that people who weren't raised exactly like me have also like things have resounded for them, which makes sense. Is what I didn't expect it. I think, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I was reminded when you and I had dinner with, like, at your house, and our podcast had just started, and you were like, Emily, do you think this podcast is going to get big? Yeah. And I was like, I do not.
I do not. I know, you were such, I don't know, it's funny to think of why you even agreed to do this, for how not, like, optimistic you were about the podcast.
I mean, I love our conversations, and I, like, love that other people, like, got to listen to them. Like, I think we both, like, when we were at Breadco talking about the Bible, like, we were like, I think people would benefit from hearing these conversations. Yeah. I think we both felt that way, but I was just like, is it going to get big?
Yeah, I don't think either of us imagined that it would, like, have a real audience of people.
Yeah, which is super cool. And even, like, when I was at, like, a party and people were like, oh, you're Emily from the Deconstruction Zone. Like, I'm just like, yeah. Or like, actually, I just did a comedy show recently, and the girl who booked me was like, oh, my coworker was like, you booked Emily from the Deconstruction Zone? And I was like, it was weird to see, like, those worlds collide, because I don't see this as, like, part of my comedy career, even though I'm just killing it with the laughs. But sometimes, like, when I get introduced on stage, it'll be like, and she's the co-host of the Deconstruction Zone. And I'm like, it's not really the same vibe you're about to get, but like,
that's funny.
Yeah, but there's been like a lot of good, and honestly, I have strayed away from like posting about the Deconstruction Zone a lot. I feel like on my personal page.
Oh, I've noticed. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I shouldn't say that. One time I made a comment to you about not helping with Instagram, and you almost collapsed.
I brought it to you like months later, and I was like, I get that you resent me.
Like, I forgot I said that.
That was an episode where we like hashed out some like conflict that was burning.
Yeah, that was like for us, some deep-rooted conflict.
Right. Dustin's like, this is not conflict. Yeah. But all that to say, like, that has just been... But I get nervous about posting about it in like my personal page, because specifically Facebook, because it's like, I don't really want a lot of people in my life to know about the pod. Yeah. And like, they do.
Which is an interesting like dichotomy though. It's like you want people to be helpful for people. Yeah. But you're also like, I don't need a lot of like people in the sphere I already occupy to consume it.
Right. And I don't mean that to say that I'm not proud of what I say. Like, I feel like that comes off as like, I want to hide, but that's...
Yeah. Well, so the reason I asked this, or the reason I thought this topic was interesting in general, was kind of that like juxtaposition of like, I'm really interested in exploring my faith. And for anyone that's in deconstruction, it'd be an encouragement I would give to them is like, your story is actually probably way more helpful to other people than you even realize. Case in point, your story really helping people. But there is the reality of the lived experience in the sphere you already occupy, and how the people that were your really close friends, church, family, whatever, the people that create that sphere might not view it with the same level of value as those outside of it, and that maybe become your new people or your new community. Mm-hmm. And I don't say that like I don't want anyone to like have to throw away their old X, Y, or Z. No, but it can be more of a turnoff, as you've probably experienced, to certain people from your OG life, your pre-deconstruction life.
Yeah. And I think about it a lot, because I said on one of the first episodes, like, you don't know anyone your story. And yet, like, I have made the choice to make my story pretty public. Yeah. And I've made my peace with that choice. Like, I think, what did someone say? Someone told me, they were like, yeah, I'm deconstructing, but like, I just don't feel the need to tell everybody. And I was like, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, like that I did not listen to. But I think it's okay. Some people do have to talk about it, I think. Yeah. It hasn't always been easy being that person. Yeah. And I like have experienced people, even like after the first episode, which looking back is like so tame compared to like where things went. But people were like messaging me, just like praying for you, or like, you know, like sending me books to read about how to like be reconciled back to God. And I was just like, bro, like, like thinking about like sending that after the first episode. Like,
Yeah.
I hope they haven't continued to listen.
When people tell me they've just started, I was like, just hang on. It gets not bad, but it gets very different.
It's not what if you like the first episodes, I'm not convinced you'll like the middle unless you like are into the story.
Yeah.
But all that to say, like, and also one of the earlier episodes, you were like, what do you think our percentage of like demographics is?
Yeah.
And I remember I said there are probably some pastors, probably a lot of people deconstructing. And I said, and I think there's some people in my life that like hate listen to the podcast. And that has like since been confirmed.
Yeah.
Like that there are people in my life who I don't talk to very much, but who listen to the podcast and like report back to other people.
Right.
Juicy.
And like, I've never spoken to them about the podcast. I didn't know they listen. I've spoken to them, but it's like
Yeah.
that part is really hard because I'm like, it was really hard finding that out because then I felt like that's a lot to carry when you come in to record.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you obviously know, like you said, like your story is now like it's in the most public sphere ever, right? In video, audio forms, and like 3 different social media platforms. So it's not like it's hidden,
Yeah.
but it does probably in some ways feel like, and it's not fully this, but in some ways, but it probably feels like an invasion of privacy to know there's people that are using it for like, like to weaponize it maybe.
And it is weird because I'm like, I really wrestle with this a lot because I'm like, I have full autonomy. Like I could choose what to say and what not to say on this podcast, but it's like,
And choose to not do the podcast.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No one's holding a gun to my head. I'm safe, but no, I choose to keep doing this podcast, and like I truly mean it when I say like I feel like some people message me and they're like, I'm sure you get so many and you don't care, but it's like every time I get a message of someone like thanking me or saying it meant something, like it's a reminder of why I do it, and like sometimes I really need that because the backlash is brutal, and people. And I also think some people just like see that I'm doing a deconstruction podcast and like make claims or assume things. And I'm just like, if you listen, I think you'll see I'm wrestling and not just like bashing.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually to go back to the book Love Wins and a story I had with it. Like I remember a mentor friend of mine got it and he read the back cover and he threw it away. Yeah. And I think sometimes what people do with the podcast, they read the title, they assume what they know it's about. And like, I think if they listen to like your journey through it, it's like, oh, like not only are you not bashing and that you are wrestling, but you give like the capital C church in general and your upbringing way more grace than I often think it deserves in your journey.
You
like,
feel that way?
I do feel that way. I think like you have handled the wrestling you've had with a lot more grace than I think you necessarily need to. And I think that's because you're like a thoughtful and wise and generous person. And like, you're not just entering into this to be like, well, middle finger to everyone else out there who's like, you know, like I saw this always as like, this wasn't Emily's journey to burn it all down. It was like just a chance for you to verbally process where you're at.
Honestly, I really appreciate that you said that, like, because I feel often like I sometimes like listen back and I'll be like, I could have been nicer, or like I could have been, because also, so this is a really interesting side story, but before you and I decided to do the podcast, so a little less than a year before that, I was on a deconstruction podcast as a guest. And my pastor found out, and it was like this whole thing, and he was like, you know, he sent me like this long message about how I like misrepresented the church and how it wasn't fair.
Interesting.
And
I think I knew this.
Maybe. And I said, I was like, I like didn't share it because I didn't really want people to know about it, but I just wanted like, I thought that my story would be helpful to the current listening, like the people who are already subscribed to that podcast.
Yeah. I
was like, that'll be great for them. I don't need my people in my life to know about it, but somehow like they found it. And it was like, and people were mad, like people like high up in the PCA were like mad because I was like pretty, and I was also a little more fiery than like I will give my like, I was kind of at the beginning of like my anger deconstruction phase. So I understand that maybe I wasn't the kindest.
I don't think I know the story actually. Now, like the more details you share, like I don't feel like I've ever heard this one before.
But I remember saying to my pastor, I was like, I didn't want you to hear it. And he was like, well, then that means that you're not proud of like it. And that means that you know you're sinning. And I was like, I don't think I'm sinning, but I didn't need that to be public to everyone. But I thought that like who it would help, it would help.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's wise in itself. And like, I don't share every episode. Like, there's certain ones that I'm like, this one will be helpful. But in the same light, it's like, I don't need everyone to know that like I'm the host of a podcast that's about this, because it's not for everyone. But yeah, I think that's an interesting, especially when I think that's a false dichotomy, though, to be like, I didn't share it, which means I'm ashamed of it, which maybe you were ashamed of it and you did do it, but I don't think that's always the case.
I think I didn't want the backlash, which I think is still true. Like, I don't always share it, not because I'm ashamed. Yeah. And this is what my therapist said this, and I actually think, I don't know if I brought it up. I don't think I did. He was like, secrets are rooted in shame, but there are boundaries of knowledge that are wise because you think it wouldn't always be helpful for everyone to know everything. Yeah. And I thought that was true because I think sometimes we think secrets are rooted in shame. Therefore, if I'm not telling everyone, I must be ashamed of it. When in reality, of like, boundaries of knowledge are real, and like, I don't need to like share every episode with everyone. Yeah. Or be like, I mentioned you in this one, like go to minute 12, you know, like I don't need to do that. Yeah. That doesn't mean I'm ashamed. That doesn't mean I think I'm doing something wrong. I think that this podcast has done a lot of good and I'm very proud of what we've created. But like, it is hard to stick by that sometimes because I just sometimes feel like when I'm in interactions with people, there are times where I'm just like, I know you listen and I know that you hate it. Yeah. And that is so hard because we've never talked about it. But I'm just like, that's like a super weird dynamic.
Yeah, I get that to maybe not a lesser degree, but a different degree with like the well. Like when I like talk to people about the church, like there are people, pastors and just lay people that I know are not about what the well is about, like specifically on like LGBT inclusion, some about like women preaching. One of the most common things when I meet pastors out in the wild and they don't know about the well, they just assume certain things to be true about me. And similarly, like when I'm feeling like it's my job to like tell them who I'm about, like I'll be like, hey, let me tell you what we believe. Yeah. And sometimes I just like let it ride and I just like don't speak up, which I don't know is always the right thing to do, but it's like I'm not going to win this person over in a theological argument, so I don't need to talk to them about like all the stances of the well, you know what I mean? Yeah. But there are times of talking with people and I'm like, I can tell that you like really don't care about what the well is about. And you not only don't care, you disagree with me about it. And it's an interesting like dynamic to carry when you know you're looking someone in the face and they're maybe not being mean, but you can tell that like they don't actually value or they might even disagree with what you believe. Yeah.
I was trying to see the other side of it because I was like processing this and I was like, sometimes I feel very frustrated because I feel like people talk about like how to engage non-Christians, but then it's like, not that I'm a non-Christian, but it's like, you don't engage me with that level of kindness and grace and curiosity that we were taught to engage non-Christians with. And I get very frustrated by that. And I was thinking, I was like, what is the difference between someone who's never been a Christian and someone who like deconstructed? This is what I was trying to get to in our previous episode.
I was like, I feel like we just kind of like went this direction, but not fully this direction.
But I think it kind of actually matches more here is like the difference is, I wonder if there's a feeling of the people who listen to this podcast or know about this podcast or are just generally discouraged by my journey, which I know is a lot of people. Like, I know like my own pastor has emailed people and like just there's a lot of talk about the podcast that I'm not a part of, but that I like hear through the grapevine. But I was like, okay, if putting myself in their shoes, or let's like hypothetical do it. It's not really hypothetical. But okay. And it's a little bit different, but let's go with it. So let's say that I left the well and started a podcast about how that was a really unhelpful place for me. Yeah. Would it be hard for you to be my friend?
I'd murder you.
I think that's a real question, though.
Yeah. So it would all be about tone and vibe, right? So are we still friends in this? Like you and I? Like,
that's a good question. You've started being aloof and weird to me.
Then I'd probably be hurt. I would go back to why aren't we friends? You know, like I think if you started a podcast about the negative things that the well has done in your life, presuming there is a list of those things, like in this hypothetical, or maybe reality. Is there a podcast brewing right now?
Dustin is my co-host.
But so like in this, it's presuming that we've had a fracture in our friendship.
Yeah.
And so I would say I would hope our friendship is strong enough where I would be like, say what you need to say. It would hurt my feelings. Like that's a reality of that would be naive and like a lie of me to say it wouldn't hurt my feelings.
Yes.
But I wouldn't trade our friendship in if it's what you needed to share.
Okay. But so I'm trying to put people in that. I'm trying to like see where people are coming from if they feel how you feel. Like, am I hurting people's feelings doing this podcast? Probably.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's likely true that like there's certain people that, but I think I can think of a handful of people off the top of my head that feelings you might be hurting.
Yeah.
And I wonder if more people are more just discouraged than their feelings are hurt. Like, I think those are two real pockets of people. I think
Agreed.
There's more in discouraged than there are in feelings hurt.
I think that's probably true. I think there's some betrayal and some feelings hurt. Like, I think if it's something that two people shared for a long time and you were like super about it, for one person to leave. Like, I'm trying to think of another example. If I played pickleball with someone, which I don't, but then, and we were like all in, like that was our whole life. And then I was like, you know what? I don't like pickleball and I'm going to start a podcast about the like really difficult aspects of pickleball. No, I mean, that's obviously different, but it's like, I don't think I would feel betrayed.
Yeah.
I would just be kind of bummed.
I think it's a hard hypothetical to
You're so right. I'm sorry.
down. But I do think that it's like at the core of all of it. Like, and I can think of some of the people that I would put in the feelings hurt category.
Yeah.
That there's probably more relational work that needs to be done if on both their side and probably your side.
Yeah.
But none of that work is probably being done, which is what makes the fracture and the frustration feel bigger.
Yeah. What do you think some of that work could be on my side?
Well, I'm giving them the benefit of that to say it's not all on their side.
And I'm sure I've said things that hurt people's feelings. And like, even I felt a little bit bad. A few weeks ago, I talked about like my friend's wedding and I was like, that was kind of like shitty to dog on her wedding, like right after it happened.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of thought like, I was like, I haven't always been the nicest and sometimes I am sassy and sometimes I probably say things that are rude or unnecessary or like share people's information. I don't share people's like.
So what I would say something that's a reality is you and I record this podcast like we're the only people listening to it. But the reality is that there are a lot more people listening to it. So there's probably wisdom in the things that we say that, and even what you're saying, like I have similar things. Like I probably shouldn't have said that. Even the thing about like Annie or the clothes, I was like, I probably shouldn't have said that. But in the same, like there's things like the weddings. I've had similar thoughts too. I was like, I wonder if they'll ever hear that when you say those things.
Yeah.
But also, I don't know if those are the people that are struggling the most with things, right?
And I don't know either. But it was just one of those, like, when I heard a TikTok clip of it, I was like, oh, that maybe wasn't necessary, Emily.
Yeah.
Like, just like things like that. Like, I'm not going to say that I'm just like a perfect co-host and I never say anything rude or unnecessary. But I think the discouragement category is way bigger because I think a lot of people feel this, like, confusion about the fact that I was like the poster child. I was the most into it. And now I'm the one with this podcast. Like,
yeah,
so many people, like, I think a lot of people, I'm going to specifically talk about people like older than me. I think they saw me and they were like, you give us hope for the next generation of like evangelical Christians. And then I didn't live up to that.
Yeah. No, I think it's jarring. Like you went like full 180.
I did.
And I wouldn't actually say that because I think you take your faith. I think you take all these things seriously. But from where you were, like, it's perceived you took a 180. Mm-hmm. And I think, and we've said this before, but I think some of that tension is more a them thing. Because if the poster child can fall away, then I can fall away. Like if the poster child is going to deconstruct, then why wouldn't I? Like you're on paper the most learned and established female Calvinist that exists. And so to be like, well, shit, like she deconstructed, why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
And I do think there's some level of like internal and personal insecurity that drives some of that. Yeah. Like for people, I think some of it's like feelings hurt, some of it's betrayal. But I think, again, and I said this is the takeaway last time, I think the totality of it is it's complex. And oftentimes, from me sitting on the outside observing, you could tell me if this is wrong or not, I think some of the places that you have tension with people relationally is they're not giving enough credence to the complexity of it, and they're viewing it as a singular thing, and they're not seeing all of the things. Where I think you, better than most, understand the complexity. Like, I think you see the complexity.
Yeah.
You don't always handle it right or perfectly.
No.
And there are things that you get wrong. Like, and that's one thing I think some people, like the people that hate listen, they're like, I'm co-signing everything you say.
Yeah.
Or that we're just here to march down and we think we're right on everything. I think neither of those things are true. You say a lot of things I don't agree with. And I often sit back and I'm like, that's not always my job, though, to tell you I agree or disagree with you. Like, my job is to be your friend and to, like, walk alongside you, like, and just be your friend first and foremost. So I don't know.
Well, I know, like, I'm so sorry, Annie, to bring you up again, but like, I remember I was over at your guys' house, and I remember Annie was like, sometimes when I listen, I'm surprised Danny doesn't like speak up more when you say something that like I know he doesn't agree with, and I'm just like, yeah, I think I just think you ride that balance really well, and I'm actually glad we're talking about you as a co-host, because I have been fascinated, and I think you have too, of the fact that so many people who don't know you, who hate listen or who hate see that I have a podcast, think that like you are the cause of my demise.
Yeah, people think people give me way more credit than I deserve.
They give you a lot of credit.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, but I think some of it falls into the I'm co-signing by omission, like by not pushing back on something I disagree with, like that, or just by even creating space for this, because like the podcast you were on, like another one, like just by virtue of being on it was the negative thing.
Yes.
And so by virtue of doing this, for some it could be a negative thing, you know?
Yeah, but it's so interesting, because I would say my friends who are maybe like less Christian will listen to the podcast and they'll be like, we think Danny kind of challenges you a lot, and sometimes that bugs us. And I'm like, yeah, but it challenges me in a way that I think I need, and I think shows a lot of nuance. But I definitely think that, I mean, people have said like if Emily could just like get out of Danny's clutches, like she would be fine.
Yeah.
And I just don't get that, because that is not the vibe.
I think that it's funny. I also think, like, and this isn't not where you're in, but I was thinking of this as you were talking, like, as an 8 on the Enneagram, like, one of my favorite and most relationally formative moments was our "What would Jesus prove" thing about hell, where we like argued a little bit, because it was like I gained more trust with you and for you, and like I don't need you to agree with everything I agree to, like respect you, to trust you, all those things, and I think that's like to get in the mind of other people. I think they often presuppose their like mental state and the non-negotiables they have to have a friendship and relationship and impose that on me. And I was like, that's just not how I operate as a person.
Yeah.
And I think that's often what can be sticky for some of those people too. It's like, just by being here, like I'm either forcing and manipulating or like sinking the use of my clutches in, or I'm like just fully on board with you, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting, like if anyone truly listened to this, it's a lot more of you pontificating on things than me like giving my theological perspective on things. And I do from time to time, but I feel like if there's a percentage, I feel like you probably go theological more than I do.
Yeah, for sure. And I just think that I just think that's a really interesting dynamic of the people who I've heard like hate listen or like just see it from afar. Like they're like, if Emily just would disassociate herself with Danny Lieberger, like her issues would be solved. And I just think like, I just don't think that's true. Like I enjoy your friendship, but I also think if we weren't friends, I think I would still be on this path.
Yeah.
I know that I would be.
Yeah.
If anything, I'd be like less on the churchy path than I am.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't think people get.
Well, I also think you come from a tradition where it's like the male pastor has a lot of authority and sway. And so people view me in that, like they give me more credit than I deserve.
Well, one of the people that got really pissed at you was an old pastor of mine, which I think is interesting because I'm sure he was like, he felt this like transfer of authority.
Yeah.
I don't think we've really dug into that, and maybe you don't want to.
Well, I actually would love to.
Okay.
Maybe not in this episode.
Okay.
Because I think we're getting close to an hour.
Yeah. Oh,
So
we got a lot to say.
We
It's
have
been a
a
few
lot to
weeks.
say.
Yeah.
So, but I think I would like to talk. Let's put that one in for our next one. This
Okay.
idea of talking about.
Little teaser.
I don't know exactly what you mean or where you want to go in that transfer of authority kind of conversation, but I think it would be interesting.
I think the idea of the transfer of authority and how that was a conflict, I think is very interesting.
Because not to tease, like I don't feel like I have authority over you. Like,
Right.
So like that's like I think I can be your pastor, but we've also talked about you view me as a friend, probably first, pastor second.
Yeah.
But the idea of authority, like I think for the person you're talking about, they very much thought about that, and like never crossed my mind when we started this podcast.
And it views me as this sheep that can't think for herself. Okay.
Right.
Pause. Where did you want to go?
I think, I mean, we've been in a lot of places, but I
Yes.
think it might be just worth kind of like landing the plane. And
I
kind
dig
of
it.
Taking us out. And I don't, just to not bury the lead, I don't have a recommendation.
I do, so I'm going to say one if that's cool.
I would love you to.
Okay, so yeah, land the plane. This kind of ended up being, I feel like this is the episode that like podcasts do after they get canceled of like, we're not perfect, but that's not, do you know, it kind of sounds like it.
This is like our apology tour.
It kind of feels like an apology episode, but I honestly think that what we don't talk about, this is kind of meta, but like we don't talk on the podcast about how big of a thing the podcast is in my current spiritual journey.
Yeah.
And I think that it's
Both
like
positively and negatively.
100%. And I think it's interesting. And I guess like what I want to say is like, I do think, I can't believe this is I'm not saying this is the takeaway.
Start a podcast.
There is wisdom in not telling everyone where you're at. If you are not ready for the backlash, if you don't want it, you don't have to. And that doesn't mean you're ashamed. I have made this choice, and it comes with a lot of good and hope and a lot of bad and hard and like real relationship fractures that have like been said, this is because of your podcast.
Yeah.
And so like it has not always been easy.
And as you said, though, it's like you don't know everyone your story, but there probably is wisdom in find people to share your story with.
And if you make a podcast about it, like people you don't want to know, like will find your story. And that is part of the risk. And like what I can hope and believe is that like, if the people who do like quote hate listen to the pod, like if they actually like listened with a little bit of an open mind, not saying like you should deconstruct, but I think if people like really listened in a space of saying like, where is Emily at? I think that they would see that like there's a lot of work being done and that the journey is far from over.
Yeah.
And to not, I don't think, I get why people see this as discouraging, but I think if people really listen to every episode, I don't think they would be as discouraged as sometimes they seem to be.
Also, like I think about like, so say you read the Bible or whatever, like, and someone's reading the Bible for the first time. If you read it to prove it to be wrong, or you read it just to see what might be good or true about it, you're going to pull different things out of it, right? And so I think
That's
the
so
posture
good.
that you engage it will dictate what you pull out of it. And I think that would be my encouragement too. If there anyone is hate listening, I think give you the benefit of the doubt, like, and listen to it to say like, where might this be right, or where might I be able to grow, not like, why is this wrong?
And maybe this is like a challenge. And honestly, like I probably could do a better job of this too. But like, yeah, like what if for these people or whoever like entered into this podcast being like, what can I find where I agree with Emily or agree with Danny? Like, I think that also just like breeds so much more unity in the church. I think we need that anyway in like politics, in religion. Like, I think finding that common ground, not to change someone's mind, but just to say like, we're not as different as I think is a beautiful skill for anyone to have. I think that's a good like way to land the plane.
Yeah. So
my recommendation.
Yeah, what's your recommendation?
Okay, my sister Molly and I went and saw Elemental, the new Disney Pixar movie.
Is it good?
Loved it.
Wow.
I think it is absolutely fantastic.
Is it a crier? Will I cry?
You might.
I love that.
Honestly, it's kind of like the rom-com we've all been wanting, but it's also like, this is what I said on my Letterboxd review, which is like Goodreads for movies.
Sure. You didn't even have to tell me that. I just assumed that's what that was.
Is I said, this is like the Pixar that we've like known and loved and been waiting to come back. Because I feel like some people have felt like Pixar, I don't know, some people are like, I just feel like we haven't had the classics lately. Really good. I also felt like I said it was the rom-com we all wanted but didn't know we needed. And I also said what I really appreciate about the movie is it's heartfelt and beautiful, and it has a lot of messages, but it's not on the nose. And this is getting kind of like meta about media lately, but like media lately. I feel like a lot of movies I've seen recently like spoon feed you the message that they want to give you. And I've been kind of frustrated with that. And what I loved about Elemental is that like it's very clear what they're trying to say and how they're trying to say it, but I never felt like it was never patronizing.
Yeah, no one overtly says the like, because that is a thing, right? In certain movies,
Do you know
like
what I'm saying?
they like say the takeaway like as a part of dialogue.
I guess maybe we should all love each other. Like it's like shut up, you know? It's like
we get the movie.
It's like you trust that your story is going to say what it needs to say.
Yeah,
I feel that very strongly, and I feel like Elemental trusted the audience in a really beautiful way, and I just thought it was honestly fantastic. I couldn't recommend it more.
Yeah. My kids are so excited to see it.
Are you guys going to see it?
We don't see a lot of things in theaters. We just saw Mario, my son and I did, which in a similar way was like there was no message, and that's kind of what made it fun. It was like
I love that.
It was nostalgic and it was no message. But I'm like, interested to see this one because they're interested to see it. But I'm also like, there's going to be some cool message in the story.
But I don't think it's what you expect.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, I couldn't recommend it more. And it was a really fun time with Molly, my sister.
Molly.
I know. Molly's the best. Your favorite basketball player?
Yeah, that's very true.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to this podcast in general. And thank you for all the people who have been really encouraging. Like, I know I've said it multiple times in this episode, but like that never gets old and means a lot. And honestly, like helps me keep going in times when it like, I've never been like, I want to quit, but there have been times that I'm like, is this worth the backlash? You know? So thank you for that. I know there are a lot of supportive people who listen, and like, that's never lost on me. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being encouraging, and embrace the journey.